And but it's just a fish packed down with a lot of salt to preserve it. Okay, and that is done so that the food will not be destroyed, that it will not go bad, right? So preserve really is in this attribute or this act of causing things not to corrupt, but to save them in the state that they already are. So when we look at James, let's look James chapter 1. Thank you guys for holding on and going with me. James chapter 1. So when we talk about salt, it's a preservative, which also means it preserves, right? So James 1 and verse 2 through 4 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds." Why? Because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Verse 4 says, let your salt, right? Let your salt finish its work so that you may be mature, complete, and not lacking anything. What Charnel said, she said, "Yup, took it with tears, but stayed until the end, until the Lord clarified the next." Absolutely. And that's exactly what Paul is saying here in James, where he says, you got to let the salt do its work. He said, let perseverance. He says, your faith. He says, because of the trials of many kind that you experience, your faith is going to produce this salt that you need. And then he says, and when that salt begins to flourish and come forth, he says, you need to let the salt do its job. Let the salt do what it's supposed to do. Don't quit. Don't stop before the influence has been able to affect the entire sphere, the entire place or atmosphere that God has placed you in. Paul says, let that salt, let perseverance, let the salt, let your influence finish the assignment that God has given unto you to fulfill. Don't run from what God is giving you to do. It don't always feel good. It don't always look good. But one thing you can trust is that God, if anybody is on your side, God is on your side, and God is working things out for your good. So perseverance, it means to be steadfast in doing something despite difficulty or delay in achieving the success. Let perseverance, let your salt keep you. Hallelujah, right? So salt preserves. Salt keeps things from corrupting. Let the salt keep you. Let it keep your mind. Let it keep peace within you. Let it keep you calm. Let it keep you in the spirit that God has called you to. Let the salt keep you from being corrupt. Not only you from being corrupt, but also allow the salt to cause the atmosphere or the sphere from being corrupt, right? Sometimes when you come into a place or environment, things will go smoothly because you're there. Sometimes people respect who you are so much, what you stand for, that certain things will not happen because you are there. They won't say certain things when you come around. I was getting my car tinted the other day, and a young boy came and tatted up. Ain't nothing wrong with tats. I'm just saying he was tatted up. He had dreads. He had his hat on, his baggy pants, and he was talking to the guy, and somebody started cussing. He was like, "Say, homie, don't you see that lady right there? Hey, Lee, how are you?" He was like, "Don't you see that lady right there?" I was laughing in my mind. He was like, "Man, don't be talking like that in front of her." There are certain people that will respect who you are in the place that you are. So you have that influence, you have that salt that'll cause the environment that you in to not be corrupt because you are there and because you have that salt or that influence. And here's a great thing that I found out when I researched about salt, is that in Israel, because Jesus says that when you lose your salt, basically he says, like, you're no good. He says, but if salt loses its saltiness, we're still in verse 13, how can it be made salty again? he says, it is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. So what I found out as I studied is that in Israel, when salt lost its flavor, what happened is people will begin to take the old salt and sprinkle it on their rooftops and pat it down, and it would help the because their roofs were flat. Their roofs were not like ours at these angles, but they had flat roofs, and they would take the old salt that lost its flavor, and they would pack the roof and put it up there, and it would begin to harden, and it would protect the roof from caving in, or from any holes or any debris or any leaks from coming in. And they would also use it as to put on the ground as a soil that children would run on and that they would play on. And so Jesus literally says that it will be thrown out and trampled underfoot because the children would run on top of it to play. And so what he says is that when you don't allow your saltiness or your influence to be able to keep you in a place, to be able to keep the environment, and to be able to influence others, when you no longer have that ability, basically you're just thrown out and trampled over, which means you won't be able to preserve, which means that you end up allowing your environment to overtake you instead of you being the influencer of your environment. And anytime you allow your environment to overtake you, then you've lost the race, right? You've lost your seasoning. You've lost your ability to impact the environment that you are, or to even influence it. So we want to make sure that we do our best not to allow the flavoring that God has given us, the influence that God has given us, the perseverance that God has given us to lose its effect or lose its power. It's our responsibility to protect it. It's not our responsibility to give it to us or to assign it to us. That's what God does. But it's our responsibility to be able to protect the saltiness that He's given us. Why? And how? Well, one way is, I believe it's Psalms 1 that talks about that. He says, don't stand in the way of, let me find it, because I want to quote it right before I start saying all kinds of stuff, and y'all be like, she don't know what she's talking about. When I do. Psalm says, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked. He says, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on the law day and night. Basically, we have to be careful of our environment there, and that's not saying, because sometimes in our spirit God will put us in places that will have the possibility to influence us in different ways. Thank you, T. That does not necessarily go with what we believe, but He only puts us there when He knows that we have the capacity to do what it is that He's assigned us to do. But when we literally set up our company and dwell ourselves around people who have more power of influence around us, then we begin to lose the influence that God has given us, and we start to act the way they act. We begin to talk the way they talk. I want to give you an example. When I was in undergrad, so I went back to school when I was a little older, and I was at Texas Southern University, and I was around a lot of young people, and nobody knew that I was a preacher or anything. I just was there going to school to a lot of people. They knew that I was older than them because a lot of them was 19, 20, 21. And at that point, I think I was 30 or 31 or something like that. And so it got to a point where because I was not careful in keeping my salt, I was more vulnerable because I was there all the time. I took a lot of classes at one time, and so I was at school every day around these people every day, and all they did was cuss and talk vulgar and all of that. And so one day I was just talking, and cuss word just slipped out, and I didn't even think about it. I didn't consider it. It just came right on out. Why? Because I had spent a lot of time with these people and not paying attention to my spirit, not having a guard around me while I'm with them, not being attentive and not paying attention to my ability to have salt so that I could influence them or infect my environment. I was just there chilling, hanging out, wasn't trying to be known as a pastor. The one girl that did know, I was like, don't be telling nobody I'm a preacher or whatever. It was almost like I was hiding or I don't think that I was offended. Not I don't think that I was what is the word I'm trying to say? I wasn't ashamed of who I was or what God had called me to. I think I was just trying to avoid all the extra that comes with that amongst people that don't believe, because there was one particular girl who kind of gave me havoc. But I was not being faithful to the sphere that God had given me. I wasn't being faithful to the influencer that He has created me to. So it's our responsibility that we make sure that we're influencing our best, and making sure that we're not taking on these ungodly environments, because we hear it all day. We hear negative things all day. We have to be on guard. We have to guard our ears. We have to guard our hearts. We have to guard our minds, what we take in, all this TV we watch, and these hip-hop Hollywood different basketball walls and baller wives and all these things where people are fighting and cussing, and that's all they do, and that's all repetitively over and over again. So, that year that I sat out and sat home, I watched a lot of this stuff that I didn't get to watch because I was always busy and working and in school. And so as I was just chilling at home, I was watching all these TV, and I thought, after a while, I kind of got tired of it. I was like, is that all they do? And my mind started thinking about the stuff that they do. And so I wasn't protecting my sphere. I was allowing all kinds of things to come in. So we want to make sure that we're careful of the things that we allow in our sphere. And here's the last thing that he also says. Not only are we influencers, but he also says that we are people who have the power of insight. He says, you are the light of the world, verse 14. A town built on a hill cannot be hid. Neither do they light a lamp and put it under a bowl. He says instead they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. He says that not only are we people of salt, not only are we built to preserve and protect our spirit and the spirit of others, but he also says that we are people who have the power of insight. So when we look at this, we automatically know light illuminates. Light allows us to see those things that have been in the dark. Light is also about wisdom. It's also about revelation. It's coming into this understanding. And so when we look at the word insight, it literally means an instance of apprehending the true nature of a thing, especially through intuitive understanding. So let's look at John 8 and 12, and let's see what he means when he says that we are the light of the world. John 8 and 12 says, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, this is him talking about himself. He says, I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of light. And so he also, he not only is that light, but he also tells us that we also walk in the light that he gives, the light that he is. Let me say that. He says, so those who are believers, as we talked about earlier, those who are believers, those who are disciples, those who have followed behind after Christ, those who have accepted him as Lord and Savior, those that have confessed that they follow him, and it is their desire to honor him by doing the things that he's called them to do. He says, not only am I the light, but this same light that I am will also be given to you, and there will be no darkness in you as you also walk in this earth realm. And I think last week we talked about a little bit about how the world continues to seem as if it's continuously becoming more evil and more hateful, and more hatred and violence is steady springing up. And so we talk about how we in the last and evil days, and we're in this darkness. But God tells us, he says, you are the light of the world. And so it doesn't matter what darkness is around us. It doesn't matter what hatred or how much evil and how much racism and how much deceit, wickedness. It doesn't matter how much of that is in this earth realm. He still says that you are the light. And it's nothing that you cannot come through, that you can't walk through. There's nothing too dark. There's nothing too hard. There's nothing more overpowering